Today's passage is from the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verses 1 through 31. Genesis 1, 1 through 31. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. God saw that it was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters to separate water from water." So God made an expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above it. And it was so. And God called the expanse sky. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered to one place, and let dry ground appear." And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and he gathered the waters he called seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it, according to their various kinds." And it was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees bearing fruit with seed in it according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark the seasons and the days and the years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the sky to give light to the earth." And it was so. God made two great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. He also made the stars. God set them in the expanse of the sky to give light on the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate light from darkness. And God saw that it was good. Then there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters teem with living creatures. Let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." So God created the great creatures of the sea and every living and moving thing with which the waters teem, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. God blessed them and said, "Be fruitful and increase in number and fill the water with seeds. Let the birds increase on the earth." And there was evening and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that move along the ground, and wild animals, each according to its kind." And it was so. God made the wild animals according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and all the creatures that move along the ground according to their kinds. And God saw that it was good. And then God said, "Let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and the birds of the air, and the livestock, over all the earth, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves along the ground." Then God said, "I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and all the birds of the air, and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food." And it was so. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. Let me begin today with another edition of Brian's Bad Jokes. Here we go. A group of scientists got together, and they decided that humanity had progressed a great distance, and they didn't need God anymore. They could do everything on their own. And so they elected one of their members to go to God and tell him that they were good now. So this scientist went to God, and he said, "No, God, we can do amazing things. We can clone people. We can do it all ourselves now. We don't need you, so, get lost." And God listened patiently and kindly, and then he said to this man, okay, let's go back to the beginning. We'll have a man-making contest. Scientist said, okay, sure. Got to the hole, we're going to do this the way I did it back with Adam. Scientist said, okay, I can do that. And he bent down, picked up a pile of dirt, and God said, no, you go get your own dirt.
Oh.
I tell you this joke for a couple reasons. One is that it hits on creation, which is the heart of today's passage. The second is that we are also going back to the beginning. The word Genesis comes from the Greek word geonosis, which means beginnings. And the book of Genesis tells the story of how God first interacted with his people. Now, if you were here last week, then you might remember that for Pastor Appreciation Month, the church gave me some books, some commentaries on the Bible. And I am a nerd, so I genuinely do like getting books as a gift, so thank you. I thought I would put one of them right to use. One of the books I got was a commentary on the book of Genesis. So we are going to take the next few weeks to look at the book of Genesis. I want to start with a little bit of background on Genesis, very quickly. There's an ancient Jewish tradition that says that Genesis was written by Moses sometime around 1300 BC, as he was leading the Israelites through the desert to the Promised Land. Now, if you get into more academic circles, there's a lot of different theories about how Genesis was written. I'm not going to get into a lot of those today. Mark Twain once said, "Science is a wholly fascinating art. You get an immense return of theory for an infantile investment of fact." And I think that may be true of the theories of how Genesis was written. People have taken a very small amount of evidence and written some very complex theories about the origins of Genesis, and I don't think they're really worth our time. For our purposes, I think it's enough to say that at some level, Moses was probably responsible for Genesis, either in writing or editing it. And I think that sometimes people underestimate Genesis. I think people have a tendency to think of Genesis as kids' stuff. It's stories for children. It's Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel and Noah and the ark. It's just kid stuff. And they dismiss Genesis. At best, they think of Genesis as nostalgia from their childhood. And at worst, they just outright dismiss Genesis as stories for immature people. That is a terrible attitude to take towards Genesis. Genesis is the starting point, the beginning of the Bible, and it forms the backdrop for everything that happens throughout the rest of the Bible. In many ways, everything that is recorded in the Bible is built on Genesis, and the writers assume we already know the stories of Genesis. When Moses gave the Ten Commandments, he assumed we already knew how God has created the world and that he knows what is best for us. When David wrote about God's grace and wrath against sin, he assumes that we know how God dealt with sin in Noah's day. When Jesus talks about the blessings and the promise of God, he assumes that we already know the promises that God has made to Abraham. When Paul wrote about the end of death, he assumes that we know how death entered the world through sin. When James wrote about faith and works, he assumes that we already know how those played out in the life of Abraham. Throughout the Bible, the writers assume we already know Genesis, and that forms the basis for everything that comes after. And so I think Genesis is essential for understanding the truth of the Bible. Now, I understand with today's passage there is a rather large debate about this passage. As we deal with the creation of the world, the debate in our culture today is, did God create the world in 6 literal days? And some people say yes. Some people say God was creating the world from start to finish in 6 literal days. Other people say no, this is a symbolic way of talking about a longer process. There's an old joke that goes, man went to God and said, God, how long is 10,000 years to you? And God said, 10,000 years is like a second. The man said, God, how much is $1 million to you? And God said, $1 million is like a penny to me. And the man finally said, God, can I borrow a penny? And God said, sure, just 1 second.
You didn't warn us another joke.
I did not warn you, you're right. So is Genesis a literal account of a 6-day creation, or is it a symbolic way of talking about a longer period of time? I'm not going to answer that question today. Because ultimately I don't think for our purposes it really matters. The message that God has for us today in the first chapter of Genesis is the same if this is a very short time of creation or it's a longer period. For us, the message that we gain for our lives ends up being the same. And that's what I want to focus on today. I want to focus on the message that God has for our lives right now. Because I think in this passage there are 3 messages, 3 lessons that we can learn for our lives today. The first lesson that we can learn from Genesis is that God has created us completely. God has made us on every level, and He knows what is good for us. He is the one who's created this universe and knows how it's meant to function. I think sometimes we get the idea that God's laws are there to just hold us back. If I could live my way, then I'd be happy. If I could sleep with anybody I want to, then I'd be happy. If I could devote my life to selfish ambition without having to worry about giving to God or honesty or avoiding greed, if I could just try to make money any way I want, then I'd be happy. If I could use my time however I want, if I didn't bother with prayer or worship or any serving other people, if I could just do whatever I want, then I would be happy. We think that God's rules will hold us back from a full life. The reality is the reverse of that. God has made us completely. He knows the best life for us. He knows what will create a full and meaningful life. He knows what will make us happy. And when He gives us the law of the Lord, it's not to hold us back from a full life. It's to open us up to a full life. It's to lead us in the right way to live. God has made us completely. He is the one who has made this universe. So He knows how to live a full and meaningful life in this universe. So God's law is there to give us a full life. And we see that in the opening of Genesis, that God has made us completely. Second, God has made us intentionally. God made us on purpose. I know that sounds simple, but we need to remember that most people in the world don't think that way. Many people don't believe that we are here intentionally. In Moses' day, the various religions of the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians held that people are an accident. There was a war between the gods, and somehow or another, people were created as a part of that war. We are just a byproduct of something else that was going on. Or in the world today, in the religion of Hinduism, Hindus say that the great god Brahma is meditating, and when he breathes out, the world is created. And when he breathes in, the world is destroyed. He doesn't really care one way or the other. That's just what happens when he breathes. Well, in our own culture, the atheistic version of evolution says that we are here because of a long period of time and a lot of chance. There's no rhyme or reason to any of it. It just happened by luck. And there's no meaning to life. Genesis will have nothing to do with any of those views. The first chapter of Genesis points out that we are created intentionally. We are not an accident. We are not a byproduct. We are not just something that happens, but God has made us intentionally and purposefully. I mean this in 2 ways. First, God has made people in general intentionally. He has known from before the beginning of time what would come, and He's still chosen to make us. He knew Adam and Eve would eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And He knew all the disasters that would follow that. He knew about the Holocaust, about nuclear weapons, and about rap music. He knew every bad thing that would happen. He knew the cross was coming. The kind of delayed joke. Not through me. Okay. He knew about the cross. And yet he still chose to make us. Knowing every bad thing that was coming in this universe, God still chose to make people intentionally and purposefully. More than that, God has made you intentionally. You are not here by accident. You are not alive by accident. You are not in your family by accident. You are not in this room right now by accident. God has made you intentionally, and he has a purpose for your life. I know it doesn't always feel that way. I know there are times when life seems crazy or hectic. There are times when our plans fall apart or get delayed, and we struggle. We wonder if there is a plan in life, and it's not a very good plan. The message of Genesis is that God has a plan, that you are here intentionally. It is no accident. God has a purpose for your life that is specific to you. He desires for you to know him and to know his purpose for you. He desires for you to search out his will the way Christians have sought his will throughout the centuries, through meditation and prayer and worship and solitude. He desires for you to know him and know his purpose for you because he has made you intentionally. So God has made us completely. God has made us intentionally. Third and finally, God made us good. Several times throughout this passage, God pauses to say that it is good. When God created the dry land, he created the plants and the animals of the sea, and he pauses to say, it is good. God set the moon and the sun and the stars in the sky, and he stops to say, it is good. On the sixth day, God created the animals that walk the earth, and he stops and he says, it is good. And then God gets to creating humans. And this time it's different. When God made people, and he saw what he had made, he did not simply say it is good, he said, it is very good. Believe it or not, we are the high point of creation. We are the only thing of all creation that God says is very good. We are unique in creation because we are half-breeds. We are both physical and spiritual creatures. We know God created many purely spiritual creatures. We call them angels. And we know God created many physical creatures, creatures with flesh and blood that have no inner spiritual life, many animals in this world. People are unique in that we are flesh and blood, breathing, eating, bleeding human beings who also have an inner soul, who are made in the image of God. And so God says, because of this, we are very good. We are excellent. Because we are physical creatures, but we also are in the image of God. We have a soul and eternal life within us. And so God has made us completely, God has made us intentionally, and God has made us good. I recognize we have messed this up a little bit. We have brought sin into this world. We have distorted the image of God in our lives. But it's not gone. No matter how often we have fallen in sin, no matter how severely we have fallen in sin, we are still in God's image. We are still creatures so loved by God that he was willing to send his son to die for us. We are still good, for we have a God who has redeemed us. We have a God who has sent his son. For Jesus Christ, the Son of the living God, came to earth as a man. He lived a sinless life, and he died on the cross for our sins. Now on the third day he rose from the dead, victorious over sin and death. And when we put our faith in him, we have eternal life with God. Because we have a God who knows us, who made us completely, who has made us intentionally. He has made us good. In a moment, we're going to stand for our invitation. And as we stand to sing, if you need that redemption in your life, if you have felt that your life is wandering, is pointless, is lost, and you desire the goodness of God in your life, you have an opportunity. I ask you'll stand with me now as we sing number 342, Just As I Am. We're going to sing only the first verse.